About 1,000 years ago now, I did a series on this channel where I took famous superheroes and turned them into Mandalorians. The first episode of which is still one of the most popular videos on this channel, and I just kinda forgot about that series for a good long while, until today. The third season of The Mandalorian has started coming out, and today just happens to be Mario Day, so I thought what better time to revive an old series and instead of superheroes do famous video game characters as Mandalorians, which also finally gives me an excuse to do something with Kratos from God of War, because lots of people have been asking me to do that since Ragnarok came out. So, video game Mandos, let's go! Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
In a galaxy as messed up and chaotic as this one, you're never far from someone who's got a story of that time I almost died. Mention any race or creed or beast in a crowded place and you're sure to get folks flocking to you with their own experiences or stories about that thing. For instance, I was sitting around pounding back some spiked Jawa juice at the Mos Eisley Cantina when I was asked about how I got the burns across the left side of my face. Didn't even get one sentence into my story, just said the word Mandalorian, and a whole crowd leapt down my throat with their own stories of seeing those snarkin' bounty hunters. I can't even tell you if any of these stories are true. As most of these people spoke, clouds of booze stench were spewing out of them, but I guess I can't deny that they made for some interesting stories all the same. First lady to talk said she saw Mando out on Takodana. She stopped there for a rest while flying the trade routes, thought it was a pretty nice place, and decided to stop in again on her way back home. Of course, when she didn't care to fly into any of the usual ports. She was just gonna land down in the wilds, walk around the forests for a bit. But she didn't get halfway through her landing when she was suddenly shot out of the sky. She took a lot of fire before even seeing the thing shooting at her. Said the ship looked like some kind of divine bird beast flying up from the mountains. Not how I'd be likely to describe a ship that blasted me out of the air. But hey, it was her story to tell, I guess. Anyway, she crash-landed on some mountains, and figures the ship that shot her down probably assumed she was toast and left her be. Besides, even if it had wanted to confirm its kill, it was pretty busy seconds later. You see, the smaller starfighter flew by soon after, and some crazy snarkin' blue guy jumped right out of it 100 feet above the bigger ship. He was flying around over the ship, and its shields went up and it started shooting at him. The lady said she figured since that he probably had a Z6 jetpack hiding under his cape or something, but that a lot of his flying he was actually doing by using some kind of glider to zip around over the thing. Meanwhile, the starfighter he jumped out of was still circling around the bigger ship, so it must have had another pilot in it, she figured. Anyway, the big bird ship thing is firing at the blue guy, and he starts shooting blaster fire back at it from his gauntlets, and single-handedly manages to take out the thing's shields. He then flies down into the ship and just seems to disappear for a while. The lady figured after a while he'd just been killed or taken prisoner or something, but eventually there were some explosions going on top of the ship. Soon after, his buddy, still circling in the starship, lands down on top of the thing and heads to the control room. She was still pretty far away, but said from a distance this other guy looked like he might have been one of the Foch people. They're supposedly some of those bird-looking folks, but what do I know? I ain't seen every race in the galaxy. The blue guy then jumps off and flies himself down onto the mountains right near this lady watching. He comes to check on her and make sure she's okay, but doesn't say much apparently. In fact, he didn't say anything at all, but he gives her some credits to let her get her ship fixed up. Doesn't sound like something a bounty hunter would do to me, but hey, again, it was her story. She said she couldn't get a read on the guy at all. Said he was definitely a Mandalorian, but looked like he was straight out of another time or something. Anyway, the last thing that happened, she still couldn't explain. That ship that shot her down, that this Mando had just taken over or something, landed down and aimed a cannon right up into space. It fired a crazy beam of red lightning at something. She didn't really have any idea. She came up with her whole own theory about this Mando taking down secret leftover Empire weapons and using them to take down some new Death Star, but everyone kind of just made her peter out on that stuff as she was getting too into the weeds on what if. Because she was far from the only person that had a hard-to-explain encounter with a Mando in that cantina, and it was someone else's turn. The next guy to speak up was some genius that had gotten himself lost on Hoth of all places. You couldn't pay me enough to spend a day on that barren ice cube of a rock, and this guy went there to go hiking. He had supplies and landed his ship near the base of a mountain, so he'd be able to see it his whole time going. Unless, of course, a snowstorm came, which, no brainer, it did. The guy got himself lost in a storm, and by the time it cleared, he might as well have been on the other side of the planet. His ship was nowhere in sight. Things just got worse from there, because when he started a small fire to cook up some food, he drew the attention of one of Hoth's favorite little critters. A Wampa. This furry behemoth was ready to gut this guy and eat his innards when, out of nowhere, a vibroblade axe flies into the Wampa and chops its arm off. It freaks out and turns its attention to this muscle-bound Mando that's sprinting through the snow, looking ready as anything for a fight. He thrusts out his hand and suddenly his axe flies right back to him. Of course, the guy who just had his skin saved figured this must have been some kind of Jedi Mandalorian and was using the Force, but everyone listening had different ideas. It ain't that far out an idea for a Mando to have tech that can call a weapon back to him. Anyway, this Mando gets his axe back and leaps at the Wampa, ready to swing. It ducks aside and tries to bite down onto this guy's shoulder, but the guy catches the thing by the horn and tosses it into a rock face, like he's nudging a drunk away, not wrestling a snarkin' Wampa. He probably could have chopped the thing's head off right there as it was disoriented, but instead he took a step back and points at its head and just says, "Boy?" Then out of nowhere, a blaster shot snipes the Wampa right through the eye. The beast dropped like a clump of potato and was done right there. The guy who got saved looked down the mountain to see a kid perched with a blaster, packing it up to head up towards the Mando. He ain't got a Mando helmet on himself, so the guy wasn't sure if this was the Mando's kid, or a foundling, or what, but he sure as snark didn't get any answers out of the guy. He tried thanking the Mando, but the bounty hunter just kinda grunted at him and told him to get out of there. Even pointed him in the direction of his ship, but didn't say how he knew it was his. I mean, not that it'd be likely there'd be many other folks visiting that random mountain on Hoth. The guy found his way back to his ship and said he heard a lot of weird sounds and shrieks coming from that mountain after. He didn't know what that Mando was doing climbing that mountain, but he pitied anything like that Wampa that came across him and his boy.
Now you might be thinking that this mid-video interruption is to tell you that the art from this episode is available as posters on my Teespring store and linked in the description, or maybe to do an ad for the PopCross Studios Patreon, where I do a bonus weekly podcast series on my design notes, how I come up with my story and art, where you can get high-res art early before a video comes out and get all of my inks. But that's not the purpose of this mid-video interruption. I mean, it kind of is, it just was, but now more importantly, I just wanted to show off this nice new hoodie I'm wearing. To be totally honest, it's a little bit pricey and the shipping does take a while, but it has got some super vibrant colors to it. It's got some of my favorite art from the history of the channel, especially from the last year, and it's got a fun little drawing hiding on the inside of the pocket, but only people that buy the hoodie are gonna get to know who it is. Though it's probably exactly the character you'd expect it to be. But anyway, I'll link to this hoodie along with the posters from this episode and the Patreon in the description. Check it out if you feel like.
The next guy to speak up said he saw a Mandalorian that ran around with some kind of portable personal teleporter. Nobody was buying it at first, except for some lady that started rambling on about Rakata's infinite empire and how they invented teleportation centuries ago, but everyone kinda just tuned her out. Sounded like a whack job. But I guess I gotta say, the guy doing the talking on this Mando story had been through less drinks than most of us listening, so who knows, maybe he was a sound mind and still talking some kind of truth. Anyway, he was on Coruscant, another place that I ain't too fond of. Whole planet is one massive city that stinks of bureaucracy. Anyway, he was doing some consulting work and came across some kind of protest going on that was being acted out for the droid rights movement. He was just trying to get through the crowd to get to his business when he noticed this lady that really stood out from the pack. I mean, for one thing, she wasn't a droid, but more important, she was wearing a bright orange Mando helmet and some kind of funky tech on her chest and arms. The guy figured she might have been looking for a mark, and in a way, I guess that could have been true, but she wasn't paying any attention to the crowd. She was looking up at the surrounding buildings. Hard to spot anything through all the air speeders zipping around above you in Coruscant, but eventually it seemed like she saw what she was after, cause she dipped out of the crowd. The guy watched her go and started following out of curiosity, but once she got far enough from the crowd, she just vanished in a zip of light. He watched her jolt up the buildings and said it looked like she had some kind of tech that let her teleport about 20 feet ahead of herself at a time. Doesn't sound that much more efficient than a jetpack to me, but hey, I wouldn't turn down tech like that. He also said she could teleport backwards, as if she was zipping back in time through her own movement path. I mean, that's how he phrased it. It kind of just sounded like backwards teleportation to me, but whatever. Can't get too picky about details when you're listening to a pack of folks like this at a bar telling stories. Anyway, soon enough, the Mando starts getting shot at, and he looks ahead of her to see that there's this assassin hanging down by a rope wrapped around her ankles, holding on to a sniper. Nobody else was really reacting much. Too much stuff always going on in that city for something like that to really stand out. But he said they were swinging and leaping around the buildings for a good 5 minutes trying to get the best of each other. The guy claimed he got close enough to mark the assassin as this bounty hunter named Aura Singh. Of course, that got a whole argument going on in the cantina, because one guy claimed that she died during the Clone Wars, another guy said she was just a myth. I didn't have a pod in that race though. I ain't never heard of her, and even if I had, history ain't my strong suit. Anyway, he says eventually the assassin throws some kind of smokescreen at the Mando to get away, and still manages to snipe this droid talking at the protest. At that point, the whole crowd finally kicks up into a frenzy and starts to scatter. Best guess, the Mando had been paid to stop the assassin from taking out the droid, so I guess she ain't getting paid for that one. The allegedly teleporting Mando chased the assassin off, and the guy said it looked like a ship came down to pick the killer up, but he lost track of him soon after and just kind of went back about his business. Not much else he could do. It was kind of an underwhelming finale to this guy's tale, and the crowd sure let him know it. Which I did think was kind of funny at first, until I realized that it was my turn to tell a story. Ugh. Now, it was about this time I finally got to get a word in about the burns on my face. Not that I was eager to do so. I would have been fine to say nothing about it, but I guess the barkeep finally noticed I'd never actually told my story of what happened when I came across a Mando right here on Tatooine. See, I ain't a fan of telling this story, seeing as how the Mando that roasted my face was just about the shortest, goofiest looking Mando anyone ever did see. But I could fudge the details a bit when I was telling it to that pack of boozed up nerf herders. Didn't tell the crowd that I was on Tatooine smuggling creatures and weapons into Anchorhead. Just said I was here on business, and they kinda let it go when I mentioned that some gang, that I definitely wasn't associated with, let a spiked rancor loose that they'd hidden away. This spiky monster starts smashing things up in the city, tosses a few people in its mouth, and sends everyone into a panic. Eventually, I guess it got full and wanted to save a snack for later, because it grabbed this lady in a bright pink outfit and starts lumbering off with her towards the desert. Nobody wants to shoot at it after that, seeing as how they didn't want to hit the lady, but I figured getting accidentally shot is better than getting eaten. Plus, the lady was quite the looker, and if I did manage to save her, I figured I'd come out of that looking pretty good, you know? Of course, it didn't exactly pan out that way. As the thing starts getting close to the city limits, I start shooting at its eyes with my blaster. I ain't exactly the best shot, but eventually I get a hit into its throat, and that definitely got its attention. It starts running at me, and I try to hide away between a big stone pipe and a wall, when all of a sudden this red, armored Mando leaps right out of the pipe and starts shooting flames into the air around this thing. The Rancor starts flailing about and tries to claw at the Mando, but he's leaping and flipping all over the place to dodge it. He jumped off one of the buildings and even stomped on the thing's head, still shooting the odd flame spurt to disorient it. Of course, while it's distracted with the Mando, I see a chance to be the one to actually save the lady, so I run over and grab her hands to try and pull her out of the thing's grip. Unfortunately, the Rancor feels the tug pretty quick and flings its meaty arm up. I was holding tight to the lady, so I got tossed right into the air, as the snarkin' Mando was shooting its flames. I got blasted right across the head and flopped down onto a rooftop with half my face seared off. Not exactly the heroic move I was after. Eventually, the Mando manages to get at this thing's head while its mouth is open, and he shoots flames straight down its throat. It finally drops the lady and starts booking it for the desert alone, but it doesn't make it 10 feet before it drops dead from the flames. By the time I was done writhing in pain, I sat up on the building to see the pretty lady below giving the Mando a hug and a thanks. They went off together, and I was left with nothing but my medium good intentions and a burned up face. I mean, that's not exactly how I told the story in the cantina. I might have fudged the details a little bit more than that. Might have said that the Mando got jealous after I saved the lady, so he burned up my face to send me packing. But who's to say? At the end of the day, those folks weren't looking for the truth, they were looking for a good story, and if that good story happens to make me look a little bit better, so be it. Mandalorians don't need me doing them any favors.
If you enjoyed this, you might want to go back and check out my old famous superheroes as Mandalorians episodes. They're on the older side, and I've improved a lot since, but I think some of those still hold up decently well. Also, I would love some more suggestions for other things I could do with Mandalorians or video game characters. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is the idea that being open to learning is more important than being right. This is something I consciously try to remind myself of fairly regularly, because no matter how certain I am of my perspective on something being the right one, I have to keep reminding myself that there are always other perspectives that I haven't considered and other people that might know more than I do. I hope that inspires some positive growth-oriented thought. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.